Ross was always the villain. He once had his friends type up an actual list of Rachel's flaws, a printout that called her spoiled, ditzy, too into her looks, and, most brutally, just a waitress. This theory takes the lovable romantic lead of Friends, the guy the show spends 10 years rooting for, and argues he was the red flag all along. Start with the infamous defense. Ross sleeps with the copy girl the same night he and Rachel have a blowout fight, and then he spends years insisting he did nothing wrong because, as he says over and over, they were on a break. Then there's the annulment. After their drunken wedding in Las Vegas, Ross promises to get it annulled, and quietly doesn't, staying secretly married to Rachel because he can't stand to be the guy with 3 divorces. Fans point to how he treats her career, smothering her desk in flowers and even a barbershop quartet out of jealousy the moment she starts working alongside her colleague Mark at Bloomingdale's. Then going behind her back years later when her dream job in Paris is on the table, threatened by any success that isn't his. He's condescending to Phoebe's beliefs, dismissive of his own sister Monica, and openly rattled when his son Ben plays with a Barbie or when the family hires a male nanny. All of it framed by the laugh track as something you're supposed to side with him on. And that's the whole engine of the theory. None of this requires a hidden clue or a freeze frame. It just requires watching the show again with the laugh track turned down. And suddenly, the hero looks a lot more like the problem. The show spent 10 years asking whether Ross and Rachel would end up together, and the theory's whole point is that maybe they never should have. Toby is the Scranton Strangler. The Office never once shows the Strangler's face, and the meekest, most invisible man in the entire building is the one who ends up on the jury that sends someone else to prison. The Scranton Strangler is a serial killer referenced across several seasons, and eventually a man named George Howard Scub is arrested and convicted for the crimes. Here's where it gets strange. Toby Flenderson serves on that jury, and afterward he can't shake the feeling that they got it wrong, admitting out loud that he thinks he let the Scranton Strangler go free. So Toby goes to find Scub to apologize, and Scub attacks him, which you can read as proof the man is guilty, or as a wrongly accused person lashing out at one of the people who put him away. The Office watches the real Strangler lead police on a live car chase, and Toby, the sad, lonely HR rep obsessed with Pam, is exactly the kind of person a theory like this loves, because nobody would ever suspect him. It helps that Paul Lieberstein, who played Toby, was also a writer and producer on the show, close enough to the machinery to plant whatever he wanted. The genius of it is that Toby's harmlessness is the perfect disguise, and the writers left just enough ambiguity to keep the door cracked open. The show ended without ever naming the real Strangler, which means the theory has never once been disproven. The whole show is Eric's Coma. That 70s show almost never leaves the foreman's basement, and one theory says that past a certain night, none of it is really happening. The idea goes that midway through the 4th season, Eric drives straight into a tornado warning to pick up Donna at the radio station, and he never really makes it home. Listen closely to that episode, and a radio announcer even mentions a local teen in critical condition, a blink and you miss it line that fans treat as the moment the real story ends. Everything after that, the theory argues, is a coma dream, and the show's whole texture backs it up. Everything orbits the circle in the basement, where the friends sit in a haze while reality visibly bends around them. Episodes constantly break into fantasy sequences, dream cutaways, and impossible sight gags, then snap back like nothing happened, with no explanation offered and none expected. Eric is the emotional center of the whole run, the audience surrogate every story filters through, which is exactly the structure you'd expect from a tale a sleeping mind is telling itself. Some fans even read his exit from the show and his quiet return in the finale as a long goodbye. The show never states any of it, and this one stays firmly in speculation territory. But the haze in that basement, the theory argues, was never just about what they were smoking. Mr. Feeny Is God. In the very last scene of Boy Meets World, an empty classroom hears George Feeny whisper, "I love you all, class dismissed," to a room with nobody left in it. Fans argue that Feeny isn't just a beloved teacher and next-door neighbor, he's something more like a god, or a guardian angel, quietly steering these kids through their entire lives. Look at how impossibly present he is. He's Corey's grade school teacher, then somehow his middle school teacher, then his high school principal, then his college professor, following the same handful of children through every single stage of growing up. He literally lives on the other side of the fence, appearing over it to hand out wisdom the moment anyone's lost. His parting lesson, the thing he leaves them with, is to believe in themselves, to dream, to try, and to do good, and when Topanga asks whether he means do well, He corrects her. No, he means do good. It's a commandment they carry the rest of their lives. And that final line, spoken alone to an empty room, lands less like a goodbye and more like a benediction. A teacher who follows you through your whole life and loves you from just over the fence is, the theory argues, the most human idea of God a sitcom ever put on screen. Before we keep going, if you're into this kind of thing, I post content like this regularly, and I'd really appreciate a subscribe. Thanks. Greendale only exists in Abed's head. He narrates episodes, calls plot twists before they land, and treats the entire study group like characters he happens to be writing. The theory proposes that Greendale, and everyone in it, live inside Abed Nadir's imagination. He's openly aware he's in a show, name-dropping sitcom tropes, warning people about the timeline, seeming to know exactly what kind of story he's trapped in. And reality bends around him to match. A campus paintball fight ballooning into a full-blown action movie, one episode dropping into claymation, another splitting the whole group off into a so-called darkest timeline. Abed processes the entire world through television and film, and the show's tone warps to fit his head. The most surreal episodes stop being gimmicks and start looking like evidence. The janitor was never real. For the entire first season of Scrubs, the janitor speaks to exactly one person, JD, and almost nobody else ever seems to notice he's there. The theory says the janitor at Sacred Heart is a figment of JD's imagination, a walking projection of his anxieties. In the pilot, he fixates on JD over a stuck door and then torments him relentlessly, but those early run-ins play out mostly one-on-one. For years, the guy has no name, no backstory, and an uncanny knack for materializing at the exact moment JD is at his most stressed. And the whole show is filtered through JD's narration and his elaborate daydreams, which makes an imaginary tormentor fit the format a little too neatly. Here's the part that keeps it alive. Series creator Bill Lawrence has said the writers genuinely toyed with the idea that the janitor was imaginary, and even considered an ending that revealed exactly that. They quietly dropped it, giving the janitor a real name, Glenn Matthews, in the finale, and letting other characters clearly interact with him. So the writers had the reveal loaded and chose not to fire it, which leaves the door open forever. Bel-Air Is The Afterlife. The theme song says a single fight on a West Philadelphia playground changed everything, and a darker fan reading argues that fight was the last thing that ever happened to Will. The theory proposes that Will actually died in that altercation, and that everything after, all of Bel-Air, is his afterlife, or a dying dream. That taxi in the opening, the one with dice in the mirror, becomes the vehicle carrying him somewhere better. And Bel-Air itself is impossibly perfect. Sudden wealth, total safety, a loving family waiting with open arms. Every single thing the streets he left behind could never give him. Uncle Phil reads as a kind of gatekeeper, the towering figure who takes him in at the threshold. Fans tie it to the show's aching, recurring theme of Will's absent father and his lifelong hunt for somewhere to belong. It takes one of the most joyful theme songs ever written and quietly rereads it as a eulogy, because the leap from a rough corner to sudden paradise is exactly the shape a comforting afterlife would take. It reframes a feel-good sitcom as a kid finally getting the happy ending the real world refused him. The Castaways are deadly sins. 7 strangers wash up on an island with no way home, and the theory says each one is a walking embodiment of one of the 7 deadly sins. The millionaire Thurston Howell is greed, the movie star Ginger is lust, the puffed-up professor is pride, the perpetually furious skipper is wrath, and on down the line. In this reading, the island is a kind of purgatory, and Gilligan, so often in a bright red shirt, is the little devil who keeps sabotaging every single escape. No matter how close they get, they never leave, thwarted again and again in a way that starts to look less like bad luck and more like damnation. And the wildest part is that creator Sherwood Schwartz eventually confirmed the Foundation himself, admitting in an NPR piece that each castaway was deliberately written around one of the 7 deadly sins. The purgatory layer, the island as a sentence and Gilligan as its keeper, is the part fans built on top of a blueprint the creator owned up to. They never get off the island, and the theory says that was always the point. Adult Sheldon is narrating everything. Every episode of the Young Sheldon spin-off is narrated by an older Sheldon Cooper looking back on his childhood, which means someone has been carefully documenting this man's entire life. The theory says the Big Bang Theory isn't neutral reality at all. It's Sheldon's own recollection, told by the same grown-up Sheldon who narrates the prequel. Jim Parsons voices that adult version, explicitly framing the childhood events as memories. So fans push the logic forward. If adult Sheldon is narrating his early years, then the flattering, Sheldon-centered version of his adult life might be his account too. It would explain why the whole group seems to orbit him, why they tolerate behavior a neutral camera might judge a lot more harshly. The spin-off handed fans a narrator, and they turned right around and pointed him back at the original. Ted made the whole story up. The entire How I Met Your Mother is one man telling his kids a story years after the fact, and he openly admits he's changing the details as he goes. The theory is that future Ted is an unreliable narrator, and big chunks of what he tells his children never happen the way he claims. He narrates the whole series from the future, and the show keeps catching him editing reality, most famously swapping every cigarette the characters smoke for the word sandwiches. He cops to a fuzzy memory, mixes up dates, and describes scenes in detail that he couldn't possibly have witnessed. Robin's secret past as the Canadian pop star Robin Sparkles, and a dozen other cartoonish flourishes, read like the exaggerations of a storyteller, not literal events. Because of that framing, every so-called fact reaches you filtered through one biased narrator with a clear agenda about how the story should end. Fans argue the finale, the one that steers everything back toward Robin, is Ted quietly shaping the entire tale to justify the ending he wanted all along. The show is literally one long story told by a single person, and the theory just takes that premise at its word. Homer has been in a coma. In an early 90s episode, an April Fool's prank goes wrong, a shaken-up can of beer explodes, and Homer Simpson lands in the hospital in a coma. On screen, he wakes up a few weeks later, but one theory argues he never actually did. The claim is that Homer has been under since 1993, and every increasingly absurd Simpsons plot after that is just his unconscious mind spinning. It was laid out in detail by a Reddit user going by Hard to Pick a Name, and it spread across the internet to become one of the most popular Simpsons theories there is. The timing, fans note, lines up with the point where the show's logic starts to loosen dramatically. Supporters say it neatly explains the drift from grounded family comedy into pure cartoon impossibility. Homer surviving nuclear meltdowns, flying into space, palling around with presidents. It accounts for the frozen timeline too, a family that never ages a single day, while decades of events pile up with no consequences, exactly the way time behaves in a dream. And it reframes all the escalating wish fulfillment and randomness of the later seasons as the loose, associative logic of a sleeping brain. The whole thing is quietly devastating, because it means the real Homer is lying in a hospital bed somewhere, while his mind runs an endless family sitcom to keep itself company. Longtime showrunner Al Jean actually addressed the theory in public and flatly dismissed it, so it's been acknowledged at the highest level and just as clearly never confirmed. The showrunner laughed it off, the family still hasn't aged a day, and the dream, if that's what it is, simply keeps going. If this was your kind of thing, consider subscribing so you don't miss whatever comes next. Thanks for watching.